I'll let you know when we are live, actually. Okay, so we're live. Thank you, everyone. We're gonna give a few minutes, 2-3 minutes, for everyone to start joining the summit. Please share with your contacts, share everywhere, and we'll start in 2 to 3 minutes. Thank you. Thank you everyone that is joining. We're gonna give 1 more minute for people to start joining in. We already see that we have quite a number of people here. So just 1 more minute and we're gonna start with the welcome of this Puerto Rican Diaspora Activism Summit. And after the welcome, we'll go to the first panel, that is the Humanitarian Crisis panel. Thank you. Okay, so thank you. So I see that we have quite a few people continue sharing with your networks. We're very excited that we can join in and have this Puerto Rican Diaspora Activism Summit, at least virtually, because we cannot do it right now in person. Hopefully, in a near future, we can do a second Puerto Rican Diaspora Activism Summit in person with the organization and colleagues that are joining in today. So thank you again for everyone that is joining in. I would like to start by thanking the Summit Organizing Committee. Rosa, if you can, yes. So this is the Summit Organizing Committee. I would like to thank my colleague Rosa Fisek that is here from the University of Puerto Rico in Cayey, Julio Ortiz from CUNY in New York, and Maria Jose Pascual, a student from George Washington University, as well as the curators and the team at the Smithsonian National Museum of American History, including Margaret Salazar and Manuel Rodriguez, that are also joining this summit and this welcome today with us. I would also like to thank our amazing team at Boricuas Unidos en la Diáspora, including Luis Ponce Ruiz in Colorado, and Daniel Vasquez here in Virginia, Carol Velandia for the Spanish translation. We have a Spanish translation. You can see the link on the Facebook event. And also thank all the collaborators and the allies in this effort of putting together the first virtual Puerto Rican Diaspora Activism Summit in a collaboration between our organization, BOT PR, with the Smithsonian National Museum of American History, the Smithsonian Latino Center, and the University of Puerto Rico in Cayey. So from our side, for the past 4 years, our organization has focused on connecting the voices of Puerto Ricans, both on the island and throughout the diaspora, with decision makers here in Washington. We work to raise the voices of the civil society groups, community-based organizations, environmental groups, academics, experts, and activists on the island, and provide them with a platform so their concerns, their struggles, their stories, and the solutions that they bring to the table can be heard and taken into account by decision makers here in Washington and elsewhere. With that in mind, we have joined forces with our colleagues that are present here to provide a space, a virtual one in this particular case, where Puerto Rican activists, academics, community leaders, and the civil society, both, and this is very important, both from the island and also from the diaspora, can discuss their work, their projects, their initiatives, experiences, lessons learned, and challenges, as well as the recommendations on the path forward to solve some of the most pressing issues for Puerto Rican during these tough times. And we're talking about especially from Hurricane Maria and the aftermath of Hurricane Maria 2017 to everything else that has happened in Puerto Rico from that time since. And that includes also political and socio-economical problems, the Ricky Renuncia, we know all the Ricky Renuncia protests, the earthquakes, and now the COVID-19 pandemic. So we want to know how can we work together for Puerto Rico, in our case, from here in the diaspora. So for today and for tomorrow, we hope to hear ideas, of potential collaborations and projects that we can all work together in these and coming years. We're having, I will say, more than 30 organizations, most of them Puerto Rican organizations from Puerto Rico or from the diaspora, but also some big Latino organizations and other organizations based here in the US that does a lot of work for Puerto Ricans. So I'm hopeful that we can come out of this summit not only with a better understanding of what each organization is doing and planning to do, but with an acknowledgement that we have to work together as an united diaspora if we want to be strong and a relevant voice here in Washington and elsewhere. We look forward as potential outcomes of this summit, the development of some kind of coalition or working group or working committee that is something that you can bring on during the Q&As of the different panels. Also the participants, the attendees that are in the Facebook Live, feel free, during the panels to ask your questions so we can address those, to also make comments, positive ones, but also like bring ideas to the table because that's what we want to see. And see if we can come with, as I was saying, some kind of working group, working committee where we can better organize, push together, and advocate for Puerto Rico and for Puerto Ricans under one united and very strong voice. That's what we think activism is, and that will bring us the results that we want to see. So from my part, I don't want to take more time at this moment. We are going to be present throughout the summit. If you want also to contact us, you can send us an email. If you want to contact our organization, Boricuas Unidos en la Diáspora, you can send us an email to patria@botpr.org and follow us on social media. So now I'm gonna leave you all with my colleague Rosa Fisek Torres from the University of Puerto Rico in Cayey.
Good morning, and thank you all for being here today. I want to give a special thank you to the speakers participating at the summit and to all of the people who volunteered their time to make this event possible. I'm Rosa Fisek Torres from the University of Puerto Rico at Cayey, and it's a great honor and a great privilege to join you today. This event forms part of an initiative in collaboration with colleagues at the National Museum of American History to document recent disasters in Puerto Rico from the perspective of communities and organizations working on the ground to address Puerto Rico's most urgent problems. So thank you for allowing me into this space. Thank you for sharing your stories and your knowledge, and I look forward to learning together with you over the next 2 days. Next, we'll hear from Margaret Salazar Porcio from the Smithsonian National Museum of American History.
Thank you, Rosa. It is an honor to be here for this Puerto Rican Diaspora Activism Summit. The presenters and the speakers comprise such an inspiring group of people from different perspectives, and I'm really here to learn from you about your work. My name is Margaret Salazar Porcio, and I'm a curator at the Smithsonian's National Museum of American History, documenting community-led recovery efforts in the wake of multiple disasters in Puerto Rico and the diaspora. It is truly important that we represent a diverse history and set of perspectives in our museum and our research. And I thank you for allowing me to join you to observe and to chronicle the conversations had here. As a trust instrumentality of the United States, the Smithsonian is the People's Museum, and we are nonpartisan. Our goal is the increase and diffusion of knowledge, and we share knowledge and research freely with people from across the globe. But until more recently, the collections have reflected a subset of our rich and diverse shared history, more often than not white, male, East Coast stories. Documenting the stories of collective care in Puerto Rico is part of larger, deliberate steps that we're taking to create deeper relationships with communities and to ensure that a diverse history is represented at the Smithsonian. As Rosa Fisek Torres just mentioned, and as my colleague Manuel Rodriguez will state, your work and perspectives provide a valuable portrait of Puerto Rican activism, and this conference contextualizes the work of individual organizations within a broader landscape of on-the-ground efforts at this moment in our recent history. Thank you so much for letting me be here with you today. I'm handing it over to Manuel.
Good morning, all. I want to thank you, all of you joining us today for the Puerto Rican Activism Summit, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to address you this morning. My name is Manuel Rodriguez, and I am also working with the Smithsonian in supporting the Museum Puerto Rico Cultural Remarks. The Smithsonian is a nonpartisan institution that collaborates with other organizations and individuals to explore the complexities of local community interactions and the endless possibilities of local empowerment. Accordingly, the Puerto Rico Collective Care Project seeks to understand how recent disasters sponsor an important relationship between vulnerable communities and the local organizations that emerge to assist them. An understanding of this complex relationship is seminal to comprehend the dynamics of everyday community formation, not only in Puerto Rico, but in other regions of the world stricken by catastrophe. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you to Manuel. We'll still have, so right now, Rosa, if you want, let's share the screen and share what is the program for today, so people have an idea of what they can expect. Yes. Let's see if, yes. So right now, we're looking at, in about 10 minutes, we're going to start officially with the first panel of the summit. We're going to have the humanitarian crisis panel, and that's going to be moderated by Julio Ortiz. And we're going to have Maria Concepcion from Oxfam America, Nicole Hernandez for Puerto Ricans in Action, Betty Medina from Enlance de Familias, and Imam Yusuf Rios from the Three Puerto Rican Imams project. You can see here the rest of the program for day one today. We're going to have 3 more panels, and then we'll also have in between a keynote by Ramon Cruz. He's the first Latino president of Sierra Club, and that's going to be moderated by Dr. Monica Feliu Moller from Ciencia PR. So stay tuned for that. What we're going to do is, since you see it's a long program, we are going to be, after each panel, we're going to be disconnecting the Facebook Live transmission, and then we're going to give a break, so you can take a break. We're going to give a break of about 15 minutes, and then we'll go live again on the same page with the next panel, and then we'll do the same thing and go to the keynote, and then go to the last 2 other panels. So just so you know, if we get disconnected after a panel, we're gonna go back again live for the next panel on the same page, Boricuas Unidos en la Diáspora. So now, for the time being, we have a few minutes. We're gonna get our panelists and the moderator for our first panel, Humanitarian Crisis, ready. We want to thank Margaret Salazar, and we want to also thank Manuel Rodriguez from the National Museum of American History of the Smithsonian for their time, for their support in this project, in this initiative, in this effort, and we look forward to continue these collaborations in the future. So thank you. I'm seeing here that we have a couple of comments, continue commenting. So we're gonna stay here. You can see the program. We're gonna leave the program here. We're gonna welcome the panelists and the moderator for the first panel, but we'll be muted for the next couple of minutes until 11:30 that we're gonna start our first panel. Thank you, Margaret, and thank you, David, again.
Thank you.
Edil, buenos días. Saludos.
Hello, Julio. So we're live right now. Thank you for joining in. We were just mentioning to the people that are joining live that they are seeing right now the program for today, for day one. It is 11:24. We're going to give a few more minutes so our panelists for this first panel, can join. I see that we have Nicole, we have Betty, we have Maria, right? And we also have Yusuf. So we have everyone.
Thank you guys. Bienvenidos.
Thank you for joining. And we have a good audience right now joining in Facebook Live. So it is 11:25. I don't know if you are ready, because we have everyone and we have a good audience. Let's not lose them, and you can take it on whenever you want. You can start now if you want.
Perfect. Welcome to the Humanitarian Crisis panel. My name is Julio Ortiz. I will be the moderator for this panel, Humanitarian Crisis. A humanitarian crisis, we all agree, right? It's a crisis that began in 2017 with Hurricane Maria. A humanitarian crisis that still lives today with the Puerto Rican compatriots, right? That every month make the decision to leave the country, exiled by the circumstances that we all know are going on in Puerto Rico. To learn from our experiences, success, and also failures, right? And to also look forward together towards possible solutions and ways to action. We invited to this panel people that were part of the mitigation, response, and recovery efforts after Maria and the most recent earthquakes. Each of the 4 panelists will talk for 10 minutes, and at the end, we'll have a 15-minute Q&A session. Please feel free to post your questions while the panelists are presenting, and I will voice, right, your questions during the Q&A session. So can agree that the humanitarian crisis in Puerto Rico began with the hurricanes Irma and Maria, right? But we also observed as the situation rapidly deteriorated, as political elites, with their lack of leadership, corruption, and mismanagement, began to hide aid, for example, for the photo op, right? And neglect communities and municipalities of what they needed, of the needed resources. Federal agencies such as FEMA landed in Puerto Rico without much knowledge of the idiosyncrasy of the humanitarian priorities, cultural priorities, and particularities of a country with a vast network and a long history of community leadership and grassroots organizations that started delivering aid and assistance right after the hurricane. Not only were FEMA and the local government incapable of delivering a robust response, but both neighboring countries and the United Nations agencies were not allowed to deliver aid and mitigate the urgent needs Puerto Ricans needed. We needed at that moment, right? Within that scenario, Puerto Rican grassroots organizations in the diaspora started coordinating efforts, fundraising, lobbying at the state level, and sharing information on how and when humanitarian help was needed and where. This is I consider this is a chapter in Puerto Rican history in which the Puerto Rican global diaspora organized at record time to help their own families and communities on the island in need. Puerto Rican organizations in the U.S. team up with grassroots organizations in Puerto Rico, funders, a growing a number of donors to deliver the robust response needed at times of a government really co-opted by indolence and corruption. To begin this conversation, and I hope this panel will serve as a organizing mechanism, right, or startup, and a call to action, right? To begin this conversation on humanitarian crisis and the future on this issue, we invited Imam Yusuf Rios III, co-founder of the 3 Puerto Rican Imams. He's a religious community leader and educator. 3 Puerto Rican Imams, which launched with the dual Hurricane Maria and the political fallout, is involved in collaborative relief and advocacy work for the Puerto Rican community in the U.S. And also with issues on Puerto Rico. Our second panelist will be Betty Medina, who was born and raised in New York City for the past 27 years. She has been executive director of Enlance de Familias in Holyoke, Massachusetts. Enlance de Familias is a nonprofit community-based grassroots organization, and their work is centered in child and family welfare. Enlance de Familias has become a pillar in the Puerto Rican Latino community in Holyoke. During numerous disasters within the community and as far as Puerto Rico and Puerto Ricans that arrived after recent natural disasters, Enlance de Familias has been the catalyst in mobilizing support for those in need in Western Mass, right? Our third panelist will be Nicole Hernandez, she co-founded Puerto Ricans in Action in 2016 and currently leads the organization. She has a decade of work experience in the public, nonprofit, and private sectors, holding positions in marketing, communications, operations, and health education. Puerto Ricans in Action played an important role leading organizations in Los Angeles to mitigate the humanitarian crisis that followed Hurricane Maria and the most recent earthquakes in the south of Puerto Rico. Maria Concepcion will be our last panelist, and she's a program manager for Oxfam America. She led her organization in the mitigation, response, and recovery efforts after Hurricane Maria and worked closely with federal agencies, municipalities, communities, and other non-governmental international organizations in Puerto Rico. So without further ado, we'll start with Imam Yusuf Rios III and his presentation. And remember, we'll have the end, after all the presenters finish talking, we can have the Q&A session in the last 15 minutes of this panel, all right? Thank you for being here with us. So Imam Yusuf, por favor. Thank you.
Hola, ¿cómo están? How's everyone doing? So briefly, we are a nonprofit organization. We started with Hurricane Maria. We actually were in the process of preparing when Irma hit. And then when Maria hit, the reality became heartfelt, and it was a call to action. I want to focus on some points that are more practical in my presentation versus the historical background. I do want to say that based on our strategy, we were able to serve over 5,000 families, maybe around 20,000 people in 42 of the 78 municipalities. And we wanted to share that experience so that it can carry over and we can benefit from it in the future. First of all, as a principle, when we talk about our work culture, we adopted a radical collaboration method, meaning that regardless of political orientation, religious orientation, philosophical orientation, whoever you were, we were open to collaborate with you with one clear goal: make sure that we're helping the Puerto Rican people on the ground. And that, what it did for us was it allowed us to be able to really benefit from others' experiences versus limiting ourselves to say we're only going to collaborate with people that we agree with politically or religiously, or even in their strategy. Whatever needed to make the goal a priority and reach that goal is what we did. And that helped us a lot. It helped us to be flexible and helped a lot of other people to collaborate with us. When we talk about the preparation, it was basically a on-the-spot preparation that we began to take, right? And so a lot of our strategy, there was no prior experience in the Puerto Rican area. One of our co-founders had some experience in dealing with El Salvador and in logistics, so that helped us a lot. What we found was that the U.S. was not prepared. Mainland U.S. was not prepared to deal with this reality. And on the ground, when we talk about logistics and some of the challenges that we confronted, the U.S. was not prepared to deal with the Puerto Rican situation, and we began to find that out as we progressed. And the port system in Puerto Rico was not logistically ready, and neither was FEMA ready on the ground. So the grassroots organizations became extremely important because they were able to be fluid, and they didn't carry the bureaucratic mechanisms that prevented direct action from taking place. That was what we encountered initially when we talk about big picture logistics. That really, for the most part, the agencies that were supposed to be there for us failed us. And we began to learn a lot of stuff. Like, for instance, I want to give two basic examples really fast. I was operating out of Ohio, Cleveland, Ohio, and my partner was one of my partners was operating out of New Jersey, and another one was operating out of Texas. And in Ohio, we have a large Puerto Rican community. And so in that process, we contacted Congressional Rep Marcy Kaptor. And when I personally went to her office out of desperation, when I got there to try to put pressure, I realized that she didn't even have any understanding of what was going on with the Puerto Rican reality. But she felt the pressure coming because, when we're contacting from the grassroots up to Congress through their representative office or through their office of representation, it does leave an impact. The community there also so that was from the congressional side that we began to see that even at the level of Congress, there was really, no plan. They weren't, reassuring us that they have something in place. But at the same time, it showed that we can have an impact here in the diaspora if we put a little pressure on the representatives. The Puerto Rican community in Philadelphia gave us, in Cleveland gave us access to media because of Puerto Ricans in media. So, and the Anna show gave us coverage. So we began to have a voice, at the level of Congress and at the level of media. And then another case example is that locally on the ground, between here and in Puerto Rico, we were able to make connections between government officials. Like in New Jersey, we were cooperating with Diana Roman, who she's part of the municipal department of head of social services in Perth Amboy, and Joyce Negron, who is administrador de la Oficina de Enlace Comunitario, the Office of Community Affairs. And that's how we were able to create a network to operate in Corozal. We operate in a lot of different places, but I'm just trying to give you an example of a framework of hitting Congress, hitting the media, and then having people on the ground here that can help us coordinate, and on the ground there to help us coordinate to get beyond the bureaucratic mechanisms. When we talk about the issue of fundraising, we did community fundraising and internet fundraising. Because we're part of the Muslim community, we heavily relied on that community. This is something that has never been done before. And it was the first time historically that they actually responded as well, pretty generously to give back. And it really put the Puerto Rican community in general on the map. And it gave us access to a fund base that we would not have access to before. When we talk about strategy, we did anything from we talk about on-the-ground strategy of delivering services. We went house to house. We supplied emergency centers. We worked with the churches. We tried to find the areas that were most hit or hardest hit. And we were able to set up a clinic by way of using the church. In Jabocoa, we were able to set up a distribution point, assist a distribution point in Punta Santiago. And then we cooperate especially with Los Centros para el Apoyo Mutuo, which are our own people that are organizing on the ground. And we found that our people that were organizing on the ground and our people that had these experiences in the past of dealing with hurricanes, they were the most effective in cleaning up. They were the most effective in organizing. They were most effective in knowing what to do, how to handle the crisis. So our people definitely have the potential to organize, but the network, system has to be boosted up. Issues of communication and issues of knowing people and other, basic logistics. Like, for instance, where will we get, transportation from? Because at that time, for instance, the tractor trailers were down. The other issue that came up was because the ports were blocked, we had organized here to take food, but we weren't able to transport. So we had to rely on what was on the ground. And that became the most effective in that situation. And again, our people, we had a dirigente in CVS and Isla Verde. He had prepared ahead of time. And that gave us quick access to food, and we were able to bring in money, and we were able to use what was there. And we use CVS, especially not to advertise for CVS, but we use CVS because he was so prepared and the cost was effective. So that was another thing, is in those types of situations, you find yourself, confronting price gouging, which is unethical, but it happens. And we found ourselves also, trying to use whatever mechanisms were there. And we found that the hospitals were not prepared properly to handle this. And so we were in a situation where we were able to provide at least a generator to one of the hospitals in Villeques, but the hospital system failed. So in any plan that comes in the future on the grassroots level, we have to talk about supporting the hospital systems, because we have so many people that need medical attention on the island. We have to talk about, delivering medicine. We have to already have mapped out, either churches or the centers for community for mutual assistance or mutual aid We have to have all of those types of things in mind. And the people helped us a lot. They said, don't forget the center of the island. We're always being forgotten. Don't forget the south of the island. We're always being forgotten, because they felt as though that other areas were always served. So the people themselves began to determine the need. And also on the ground, the people were pushing for getting housing for those that were displaced. You know, we have in Puerto Rico that culture of those who live on the land and they work it, but they don't have a deed. And so we were able to assist Enlance in revamping a school that was actually taken by the people. And it was then turned into, it was an abandoned school that was taken by the people. They pressured the local government, and then they were able to turn it into housing for the people. So those types of concepts are concepts that I think that we need to be looking at as far as developing a master grassroots strategy. And also to realize that we have a lot of elderly that are by themselves. And a lot of times, you know, if the real hard work is going into the mountains, that's where the real hard work is at, because those people are cut off and displaced and so on and so forth. And so that was in general, you know, what we did as a framework. We connected with those who were already on the ground, those who had experience, those who were the best at organizing. And we tried to just keep an open mind and also just be hands off when we could be. You know, micromanaging in these types of situations does not work for the benefit of the people. You have to be extremely collaborative, and you have to identify who's self-motivated and has organizational capacity, and we build off of each other's strengths in this type of climate. So that's my basic outline for how we handled our situation, and give the time back.
Gracias, Yusuf, for your first presentation. Let's proceed with Betty Medina. Right? Thank you. Thank you, Betty, for being with us.
Thank you all for joining in today. And Julio, thank you for the invitation. I'll be sharing slides due to the limited time that we have, and I'll begin by sharing who we are here at Enlance in Holyoke, Massachusetts, and then move into our experience with post-Hurricane Maria. Please excuse what I'm going through. Julio, you got the slides up? Thank you very much. Okay, so if we could go to slide number 2, I'd appreciate it. So Enlace was created originally in 1994, and we started as a coalition of families and service providers in Holyoke, responding to a call by the Massachusetts Department of Children and Families due to the very high numbers of child abuse and neglect cases. The state needed the community's assistance in building a bridge between community and state agencies, who has a primary role protecting the safety and well-being of children. I am doing slides for you, and my apologies, but for those who know me, I could talk about this particular issue for days. So we're going to use only slides. Please forgive me. Slide number 3, please. And so Enlance started in 1994. We're 27 years old, but the coalition insisted that it really wanted Enlance to own its own 501c3. So in the year 2000, we were successful in being able to do that. The agency is overseen by a board of directors. We have staff, all people of color. And I just lost my slide, there it is. And we have 2 state contracts. We're funded mostly by the state. And I would like to really remind you just to keep on listening to Family Resource Center, because we're going to go back to that in a little while. Enlance envisions its work via grassroots, community-based social justice lens, because we really do meet families where they're at. The forms of support that we deliver are through community organizing, case management, mental health services, and a variety of different trainings that are identified by the community itself. I'm giving you some demographics. These slides are going to be available to everyone, but I want to just let you know that in 2019, Holyoke had a population of a little bit over 39,000. We're waiting for the 2020 census to come out because we really do believe that the majority of residents here in Holyoke are of Puerto Rican descent. Next slide. When Hurricane Irma and Maria devastated Puerto Rico in September, relatives and friends and families started to call Enlance immediately. And their questions were about if they come, when they come, will they qualify for shelter upon their arrival? Will they be eligible for housing and Medicaid and SNAP? And will the children be able to enroll in school? And how about those who were attending university in Puerto Rico? What about their transcripts? And in reality, we didn't have any of the answers. However, we kept on asking the state about these calls and looking to see if the state had a plan for when the evacuees arrived. The city of Holyoke, the government structure here, did not have a plan for such a disaster to support victims of the hurricane. Next slide. So Enlance organized a citywide meeting with the institutions and CBOs to create a citywide plan. We had to know who was going to be able to do what when the evacuees arrived. And this was coordinated with the approval of our mayor, Alex Morris. And who was in attendance? The mayor came, city and state elected officials, our Massachusetts at the time Undersecretary of Housing and Community Development. We had the Social Security Office, federal, right? We had SNAP representatives in Massachusetts. The Executive Office of Health and Human Services is made up of about 20 organizations. So Medicaid, Transitional Assistance, Department of Children and Families, and so on. We had Holyoke Hospital, Holyoke Health Center, mental health providers. We had the Western Mass Food Bank, which we will talk about later. We had Mass Hires, who is the one that does employment and unemployment here. We had the Holyoke Public Schools. We had local colleges and universities. We had elder services, disability services, and the list goes on. Next slide. Here's what our citywide meeting looked like. Next slide. Then in October 3rd, 2017, when those airports opened, hurricane victims began to arrive with children. They were elders, they were disabled adults in wheelchairs and with their suitcases coming to Enlace. The questions continued to be asked of the state to provide us with some guidance, but our Massachusetts Governor, Charlie Baker, published a letter to the victims of the hurricanes, welcoming them to the state and offers assistance and supports. However, each day, an increase of new arrivals would come to us, and we still didn't have enough information or guidance to be able to provide them. Next slide. So some of these flyers started popping up. We didn't develop them. I'm still not sure who developed them, but they started popping up. And we also started to hear from folks saying, oh, well, people in Puerto Rico told us to call you, that you had all the services available. These were not developed by Enlace. Next slide. So on October 13th, 2017, as the executive director and manager of this wonderful organization, I wrote a letter to Holyoke providers, those that have been in that citywide meeting, and some that couldn't attend that meeting. And I asked our partners to assist with what was to me an unmanageable task for any one organization, big or small, given the volume of the families that were arriving to Holyoke. That following Monday, it was October 16th, 11:30, and I start to see the trail of providers coming into our offices with their materials, their laptops, their applications, all of their bundles to do whatever it took to support the evacuees. And together, we created our one-stop welcome center. Next slide. So we had to create a process. These two individuals that you see under the Welcome to Enlace, they were evacuees themselves, and they arrived here as soon as the airports opened, and they said, how can we help? We were from Holyoke, or we know of Holyoke, and we're here to assist you. And so they started as volunteers doing an intake process for us, because at the time, Enlace only had 5 employees. The slide next to it is we started doing an orientation session where we would inform the families of what was going on, sharing whatever information we had, and then all of our partners that were here would be seeing each member of the family, asking what their needs were and to see how they can support them. Next slide. So each day, Monday through Friday from 12 to 3, these amazing colleagues of mine would arrive to see the families. CEOs and their staff would listen to the evacuee stories. of what they had experienced, the trauma, the confusion, the lack of food, the lack of hygiene products, no electricity, attempting to live without the most basic needs that we as humans are used to. The loss of relatives that they weren't even able to bury, they had to leave them behind. Those that they left behind in terms of relatives and what they needed right now. And some of them didn't even know what they needed right now. They just knew that they were thrust into this situation. But we knew for sure that they needed food and clothing and jobs, medical care and supplies in a land that some of them had never even been to, but here they were. Next slide. So Enlance then creates a donation center, right? Because we didn't want them then to have to go to one place or another without the proper clothing. And so the community volunteers organized food and clothing donations to be distributed to not only the evacuees, but the host families that they were living with at the time. The Western Mass Food Bank made weekly pallet deliveries to the center, providing food for approximately 125 families per week. It was a lot of pallets in a nonprofit center. Clothing donations of new or slightly used arrived daily from the community. Funds from foundations arrived. College students created these fundraisers on their own campuses of food and cash. It was amazing. Individuals and local furniture store donated furniture to families who had now secured a new residence. And Enlance secured Tempur-Pedic mattresses for families through a program that's called Disaster Recovery. Next slide. So MEMA, who is the right arm of FEMA, right, but Massachusetts Emergency Management Agency, started to hold these meetings. They weren't well publicized, but once I got the information, I went. I drove about an hour out and I attended the meeting. There were other organizations there and they were sharing what their services would provide in their own communities. But shortly after, the state of Massachusetts designated that the Family Resource Centers as the state's welcome center. Today, there are 27 Family Resource Centers in Massachusetts, and we manage one of them. The state of Massachusetts immediately begins to provide Family Resource Centers with guidance and support. Next slide. So now the state of Massachusetts Executive Office of Health and Human Services via the Department of Children and Families, who we have a contract with, provided temporary funding, additional funding to some of the family resource centers to hire temporary staff to support the increased demand, depending on the volume of the new arrivals, because not every family resource center, not every community in Massachusetts was getting an influx of evacuees. So the state then coordinated and facilitated this weekly statewide call to troubleshoot and brainstorm together on how to best support the families. What were the barriers that we were finding? And then during those calls, those same state administrators would either try to resolve the issue right then and there, or after the call, they would huddle and they would figure out how to be able to support not only the family resource centers, but then also for the families to move on. Next slide. So imagine, right? Family Resource Center directors across the state would be on this call facilitated by the state. We had the highest level of state administrators, including administration and finance, that they would be listening and hearing from us on the ground, asking the evacuees, asking what the evacuees needed and where were the gaps that needed to be addressed, right? So we learned that the FEMA application process was complicated, difficult, and confusing. Families did apply for services, both from the feds, but also by the state, and most were found eligible. Next slide. So on October 31st, here at Enlace, we learned that FEMA had just released the TSA, Temporary Shelter Assistance. Since it had just been released, the public wasn't really aware of it. So Enlace staff, working with FEMA on one line, and then also with a hotel on the other line, we were able to place the very first family in this area through a TSA. Thank you. Enlace staff makes contact with about 14 hotels in the area, informing them of TSA and informing them also that we've got a lot of people arriving that need to be sheltered. And there were some hotels that didn't know about it. And so that we were able to do was inform them of it. Next slide, please. So, right, families come, they're devastated, they're in trauma, they left their home and the island that they knew. arriving only with the clothes on their backs. And then we also knew that the holidays were coming. We handled Thanksgiving as best as we could, but we also knew that Three Kings Day, right, which is so special to our children and to our families. So we had applied already to get some toys from Toys for Tots, and we needed to celebrate our new neighbors. As families were leaving the celebration, and it was quite a celebration, they were given bags of clothes because it's cold here in New England. And of course, all the toys for the kids. Next slide. And so here are two slides. One of them is the bomba plena, right? And the woman who is dancing with her skirt was an evacuee. She borrowed the skirt from our local dancer, and then it started, porque soy boricua, and you could see the amount of people, and the sound that came, it shook the walls, and it says, para que tú lo sepa. Dale, next slide. So on March 18th, FEMA workers start to arrive in the family resource centers that had the largest amount of evacuees. And Enlance hosted 5 FEMA workers. This was all negotiated and coordinated through the state. Most of these workers were from Texas. They were being supervised by supervisors that were not here, they were elsewhere. It was complicated, it was difficult to work with FEMA workers in a community space. FEMA workers work very differently during disasters. The most serious complication with FEMA, which I'd like to outline now, is that FEMA workers would see the families that were entering Enlance, right? They would get processed through the front, and then FEMA workers would assist them individually. What they did though is that they would enter the information, the family's information, into their own laptops, not into the client folders. When the FEMA workers left, they left with the client information. When asking for the information that was collected, right? Because we have the family still here. We need to know what was done, what was collected. The response was make a specific client request and it will be considered. What was missing in hindsight was a really clear memorandum of understanding, clearly defining who would be responsible for what and who would be the owner and the keeper of the client file. Next slide. Some of the families did choose to return to Puerto Rico for multiple reasons. Massachusetts and Puerto Rico does not have reciprocity on professional licenses. We received nurses and surgeons and technicians and teachers, and it would be too cumbersome for them to go through the process of trying to get licensed here. It's also very cold here in Massachusetts in the winter. Some also own their own homes on the island, and FEMA was not responding to their applications for home repairs. Although FEMA did assist for a short period of time, Massachusetts government continued to provide services and financial support to the new arrivals until July of 2018. Next slide. As a community, we came together. We needed to be able to identify what we did right, what were the gaps, what was missing, but also what we had accomplished. We needed to celebrate that we did this together. And also the Massachusetts Executive Office of Health and Human Services via the Department of Children and Families held a day-long debriefing session with all of us who were involved to identify what really did work and what needs to change in the event that this type of event ever happens again. Our next step in the city of Holyoke is to create a citywide community emergency response plan. In order to be prepared for the future, we need to be prepared to respond to climate change and other disasters because they're going to continue coming. Next slide. This is one of the community debriefings that we held here in Holyoke. Next slide. You know, before the hurricanes happened, we all knew that there was a humanitarian crisis happening in Puerto Rico. And under the leadership of the Center of Puerto Rican Studies Dr. Edwin Melendez, there was already an urgency for the diaspora to unite due to the humanitarian crisis that was going on. There were multiple summits in several states and a recognition of the force and the power that the diaspora holds. The hurricanes hit the island and we, the diaspora, had built already our relationships with one another across different sectors. Sharing and communicating became our priority to learn from one another and create an understanding for a mutual response. I am sharing on the remaining slide research regarding different responses to the hurricanes, both on the island and here in the United States, and the displacement of the Puerto Rican people. I urge you to visit the Center of Puerto Rican Center website and will also detail the work of many of us that teamed up with Centro, who will be part of this conference. Next slide. These are two of many that really outline the work that was done here on this land and also on the island. Next slide. Thank you very much. It was an honor to be with you today.
Gracias, Betty. Thank you so much. So let's proceed with Nicole Hernandez. Bienvenida. Welcome.
Hi. Thanks for having me. I'm Nicole Hernandez, representing Puerto Ricans in Action in Los Angeles. We were established in 2016. We recognize Los Angeles as unceded Tongva territory. We also want to say thank you, of course, to the organizers, moderators, sponsors, all the panelists for the work, and also all the organizations not represented today across our diaspora that really made up a large chunk of the legwork as well. So,
Nicole,
in Los Angeles,
yeah. Once, because I'm seeing here, I'm just seeing a message. Maria has to leave early, so can she take your turn because she has to leave, and then we'll proceed with your presentation. I'm sorry, Nicole. I just read the message. I'm sorry.
I mean, I'll have to head off at a certain time too. So
okay,
if she can present, though, go ahead. Sure.
Thank you, Nicole. Sorry for that. Okay, so Maria Concepcion from Oxfam America. Thank you, Nicole.
Looks like she's not here. Do you want me to continue?
Okay, so Nicole, let me see. Okay, so Nicole, go ahead. Go on. I don't see Maria here. So Nicole, thank you. I'm so sorry for the logistical problem.
No, I mean, hope everything's okay on her end. So then, Puerto Ricans in Action. So there was probably about three prongs to our approach. I'll say more about what I feel the diaspora needed in terms of strategic organizing versus what on the ground in Puerto Rico. I think that's a different type of panel and different types of experts, and not necessarily us to talk about. But in our work in Los Angeles, we both had our own projects that we were trying to be very targeted in our efforts, and so we had we thought we had pretty good legs, or kind of our ears on the ground to grassroots information coming out through different social media platforms, through organic Slack platforms that developed and helped a lot of national organizing to occur. And then also WhatsApp group with various kind of international professional emergency responders. And so we were able to, I think, to reflect very immediate emerging needs. And we also were looking at the East Coast and seeing, since they had probably a lot more access to information, what was going on. And that allowed us to do some things like, for instance, target our local Cal State University to engage the geography department to do mapathons to help, right, with open source platforms that were being used in the moment to help figure out where mudslides were occurring and what community roads are being washed away. We were also able to see the trend that waterborne illnesses were a huge concern, and be able to respond to that by helping to pilot a clean water project with the Puerto Rican Research Science Technology Trust that in about 2 years worth of time, distributed 30,000 plus filters across predominantly communities that were not connected with a governmental water infrastructure and had their own unique vulnerabilities. But those were us able to support these in these ways that I felt like were targeted, whereas the vast majority of the response in Los Angeles were where we took on more of a role of filling in the gaps and helping to organize some of the information and try to create more of a coalition where when we were allowed by other groups was the main response was of supply donations. And so I think reflecting back, we saw a lot of duplicitous effort, a lack of analysis or a collaboration amongst groups with different sort of reaches, capacities, ties to the island versus being, more diaspora, generationally diaspora. So, I'd like to say that, my family and father lives in San Juan, is a small business owner. And so we have, so I was very deeply connected and was familiar with some more, local issues. We got pushed back ourselves. There was a lot of political issues happening in the diaspora here locally as well as in Puerto Rico. So depending on who were we approaching, both our work here and our work in Puerto Rico was deemed to one way or to another way. And so I think that prevented some cross communications among us. And so the way we approached everything was just finding ways to support either logistic trains that were already organically created by different organizations, and also to provide kind of a single source of information for organizations that, were having a numerous donation sites drop-offs from not just our county, but multiple other counties. And so we were fielding a lot of inquiries because we had more of an established presence. We had a website, established presence on various social media sites. We were fielding inquiries from people across the state on where they could go for their local groups or local donation sites. And so we also helped field inquiries by business owners who wanted to join these networks and who was the right person to connect them with that could help facilitate truck pickups. But people ran into logistics, of course, with storage, where are we going to store things? How are we going to, where's the shipping company? What's most economically feasible? Who's paying for things? So those are all, yes, obstacles that we all managed to figure out, and some took months to do that. And that brings me to another point, LA, California, our Puerto Rican communities are very decentralized. We don't have a single large organization. We have organizations that have history to them, and those ones did take leading roles, but there was still this lack of communication amongst organizations. And so what I see now is almost a squander of energy and talent that was an outpouring initially. And so we had professionals of all sorts, of all types come out who weren't able to be engaged in really, useful in ways that were directed to their positions, their skill sets. So whether they were professors that had access to students, or where they were communications professionals that could get us into media circuits, or they were development managers that could help be better targeted fundraising campaigns. This was, instead, it was a blanketed response. Let's just collect supplies, anywhere from really small, kind of mom and pop, really orgs, to, I would say, one of our biggest orgs, which was Voices for Puerto Rico, really large scale, entertainment-based, celebrity-based response, who, reflecting back, thinking how their access, their influence, their networks, both in LA and in Puerto Rico, could have probably been better targeted and moved in a direction where they could have addressed really difficult situations, and then allowed some of us, other ones, to fill in and pick up the supply donation drives. And so that would have been, that could be something. Ideally, I don't have access to sort of their circles and their networks, but if we could ever engage with them, that would be something I would highly recommend. And there were a lot of also missed opportunities, because it felt like we had to reinvent the wheel. There was no sort of template on who do you reach out to, what state agency, what county agency, what unions. And only in retrospect, we realized that, not that I necessarily would have engaged with all these people, but the SEIU was super active, that the county DPSS had programs for displaced families coming from Florida and Puerto Rico. That like local city council member could have held job fairs specifically for communities. That we could have done maybe more advocacy at the state level with the governor's emergency response team. I mean, these were things we scratched the surface with, but had there been, some more of a template, especially moving forward, knowing these helps us, reinvent the wheel. And let's see. So I want to keep to my time. Yeah, I think I covered everything. Yeah, I covered everything I really wanted to, I think, go over. Targeting responses really helped us, especially after the earthquakes, know that we wanted to go outside of the institutional players who had, over the course since the hurricane, established their networks really well, had figured out funding through various nonprofits in the US. So we were able to be much more hyper-local and support a community initiative around education that really centered the well-being of children. And that was really powerful for us. So thank you. I'll go ahead and give back the rest of my time for Maria.
Thank you, Nicole. I know we have a more time in the Q&A session to expand on our ideas. We know we have a lot of information and experiences to share, and also ideas looking forward. So I know the Q&A will be the chance to do that. Gracias, Nicole. So next will be Maria Concepcion from Oxfam America. Thank you, Maria, for being with us here.
Oh, thanks so much. Thanks so much, everyone. It's really such a pleasure to be in this panel with all of you. I'm going to go through a little bit about and go over the work that we've been doing in Puerto Rico. But I have asked Edil and the others to just share one slide. As you know, Oxfam, we're an international organization, but after Hurricane Maria, Oxfam decided that it was imperative to be present in the island and really help shape the disaster and the recovery work to make sure that it was being led through what we term local humanitarian leadership. And it's not our term, it's really a term that comes from the humanitarian sector. As during the hurricane, I wasn't yet at Oxfam, as many of you know. I was still working from the municipality sector. So hearing the stories of all of you and how from the diaspora you were working with local government really reminds me personally what was happening those first couple of days and weeks. I think what we have to do now is really think about how to, think of those lessons learned and really move forward and make sure that the next disaster that strikes the island, because it's not a matter of if will it, it's just a matter of when it will happen again. As we know that our island is going to continue to be impacted tremendously by the effects of climate change. So I think that, having us come together, both the diaspora and those of us living and working in the island and working strategically to mitigate those future disasters is just really very important. And I think for all of us here speaking today, we can also understand the importance of the local actors who are really the closest people that are most affected by this crisis. So I think all of us in the way that we've worked, the disaster response and also the recovery in Puerto Rico, we've really tried to be really strategic on making sure that we lift those voices of those local actors, right? For me personally, I know for my colleague Adi Martinez, who you'll be listening to tomorrow, who's really done a phenomenal job with other partners in the island on advocacy, we've really wanted to make sure that the power and resources that are tied to this recovery are really designed, right, and worked with local actors. This is really the recovery right now in the phase that we're in, we're 3 years into this recovery of Hurricane Maria. It's really an opportunity to make sure that we continue to empower those vulnerable communities, and particularly women in leadership, so that they can continue to be at the forefront of the recovery. In front of you, you have a picture. This was early on. One of the things that we did as Oxfam in the island is that we went, in our case, we chose the central part of the island and distributed filters and some other materials immediately, right? So here we have a picture of us distributing filters to the community. You know, the program was established in 2017 and is still going very strong. It's mainly partner-led. We use a partner participation approach. We have a very small shop in Puerto Rico. It's really Marie and Adi. And we really wanted to make sure that the majority of the funds that we were able to raise were used strategically with partners on the ground. Like many of the organizations in this panel today who worked tirelessly moving funds and donations to the island, we know the importance of these groups and how strategic they can be in the recovery. Again, I came from government. I even work with government now today. And I think that what we've seen is just a real attempt to try and do things a bit better. One of the organizations that we're closely working with, for example, is the League of Cities, a nonpartisan group that was established that's really amplifying, bringing together the voice of municipal leaders to make sure that, you know, future disasters are mitigated and handled in the most equitable way possible. So, you know, in hearing all of your experiences and lessons learned, I really, you know, I'm reminded of how important it is to continue to work and build that body of local leadership that we have on the island that can continue to work strategically with all of us in the new and, you know, for the next disaster. One of the opportunities that we had with our project in Puerto Rico and that we continue to have is that we've really been able to also make sure that the response really sort of increases the role of women and really shapes women's leadership. For us personally, it's also been an opportunity to transform gender norms. And we've done that in a couple of ways. We've done that through campaigns where we've really increased the role of genders and transformed the belief systems. We've launched a couple of campaigns that I'd like to share with you afterwards, links that we can spread out again. And we also worked on a series of publications. The most notable is really The Weight of Water in Women, which really demonstrated the toll that these types of disasters take on the household and particularly the role of women, right? And so it's an opportunity for us to design response interventions and provide disaster relief that really lifts the weight from the vulnerable communities, and in our case, women. So, you know, I want to make sure that we definitely have enough time for us to continue to speak and answer questions, because I think that the opportunity that all of us have today is really to find the most innovative and strategic ways for us to really move forward and address future disasters as a strong coalition. As a result of a lot of your work that started in places like Boston, the Northeast, and the West Coast, here in Puerto Rico, we were able to actually work together with a lot of other local international NGOs and local and national NGOs, and we put together a cluster for nonprofits because we really wanted to make sure that we can find ways to make sure that the recovery was strategic, you know, that we weren't duplicating efforts, that the logistics was running smoothly. And so we were able to do that. Our NGO cluster, we had initially done it within the Puerto Rico Science and Technology Trust. At the time, we were working with NetHope, with Hispanic federations, and a lot of organizations. And I may not mention today, but I mean, it's a lot of it. It's about 50 or 60 of us. And it really provides the opportunity for us to come in and continue to support those local leaders that are on the ground, that know exactly what is needed to be sustainable and to mitigate future disasters. And so, you know, I applaud opportunities like these, right? To be able to bring us together and to sort of work strategically on solutions. Again, Betty showed us how in the Northeast, in your community, you had sessions on lessons learned, best practices, how to move forward with this. I've done my own assessments. I'm sure Yusuf and Nicole have done their own assessments. So the idea is for us to keep improving and doing this better and providing the best, you know, response for those local leaders on the ground. I'm not saying that it's perfect. You know, there's a reality, and the reality is that the hurricane and the recovery funds have not arrived in the island. It's been bottlenecked, and there are definitely delays, and that's something we do have to address. But I think that we also have to keep in mind that, again, we have this very strong bridge. We have a very strong network of the diaspora and those of us in the island that are working very closely, right? And we know historically that always hasn't been the case, but today we are working closely, hand in hand, to mitigate those future disasters. And we need to celebrate that, and we need to, you know, keep doing it and doing it better. And so we here, myself as Oxfam, we're here to sort of support that local humanitarian leadership. It needs to be Puerto Rican led, and we're here to provide all the support that we can to make sure that continues to happen. You know, the day that I can say I no longer need to, that the organization no longer needs to be in Puerto Rico, is the day that we've succeeded. So I think that's the end goal. And that's something that I always strive for. So, you know, I want to give my other colleagues here in the panel an opportunity. But again, I want to thank you for bringing together this important panel, because these are lessons learned that need to be documented and lessons learned that need to be shared. Because I think for the next hurricane season, it's us, guys. I don't know, you know, it's going to be us, and it's going to be us again. So we really need to work together.
Excellent, Maria. Thank you so much. Excellent exposition. So let's continue the conversation, right? This is the beginning of these exchange. I have several questions. I would like to, some of them are directed to specific panelists. For Maria, can you share some examples of the local partners that you're working with in Puerto Rico? Who are they? This is a question from Ricardo.
Well, you know, we have a large group of partners, and we just, you know, we have Casa Pueblo, we have the El Observatorio para la Equidad de Género, the Observatory for Gender Equity. We have Bosque Modelo. We have Furia. We have Mente Puertorriqueña en Acción. You know, we work with a series of partners. We've worked with OSAN. Initially, when we started working on the island, we supported a large project referred to as the Water Alliance, where we were making sure that the most vulnerable communities were able to access, you know, clean and drinkable water. That project, our support ended, but we were able to support the Fundación Comunitaria Puerto Rico in applying for federal funds to request funding for you know, mitigation funds around FEMA. They successfully received the grants, and today that project can scale up even more. So, you know, that's just some of the partners that we've worked with. We work within a list of partners that I'll make available as well.
Good. The next question is for, I believe it's for the 4 panelists. The question is, Jason Velasquez asked this question: are there ways for organizations in Puerto Rico and diaspora to remain connected while also making information available to those in the diaspora for knowledge, organization, and mobilization?
I'll respond in part to that. I think there are platforms that probably already exist trying to do just that. I know one recently I came across called Socians, S-O-C-I-N-T-S. And I think those are coming from, bubbling from the ground up, which is, I think, the best way to go about doing it. And there were, organic platforms that were used, like through, groups that came together through, like, Slack was a big one. I forget the name of that group, but it had programmers, communications, public PR, every professional I could think of there helping to create templates. But I think trying to utilize things that are already being created, because I think people in Puerto Rico are trying to create solutions for that.
As part of Centro, there was a GPS set up, and it was looking at the inventory of not necessarily nonprofits, but organizations that had come together, people that had come together on the island, especially on the inner core and others, and then also trying to match them with nonprofits locally, just trying to be able to have those conversations, and also about the need. Because from LA to Massachusetts, it's the world, ¿verdad? And so it was like, okay, so what kind of programs do you run where it could be helpful to the people in Puerto Rico? My dream always was to be able to have those conversations. It's almost like creating a think tank about, okay, who's out there on both ends, right? Aquí y a cruzar el charco, about, so what is it that you do that maybe we have resources, or maybe it's just about, things that we've tried here that have worked, and then share it with those in Puerto Rico, and vice versa. Because to be very honest with you, during orientation sessions that were happening here, I learned from the evacuees. I can't tell you the kind of lessons that I learned every single day about what life on Puerto Rico is today. I haven't lived there since 1970, so the world is very different there versus, what we experience here on the Northeast. So just being able to have those conversations, exchange of information, and exchange of research that can help both of us on both ends. That's always, been sort of kind of the philosophy behind the GPS, and also mine personally.
Excellent.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that. I know, Betty had mentioned the Centro before. I know Centro organized a series of conferences here in the island and in New York as well. And in those conferences, they would oftentimes invite, administrators, government administrators. And I think, and Betty, again, going back to your example of having the debrief and sharing lessons learned, I think a lot of times we assume that the other doesn't want to listen to those lessons learned or those opportunities. And I would encourage all of us to really use that also as an advocacy strategy, right? Use those lessons learned. Let's gather our information, our data. Let's go meet, and let's really find tangible ways to, make sure that the next recovery, the next, support phase of any disaster works well. And I think as we move into this new administration, and now with new directors at FEMA, I really think it's an opportunity, right, to take these real lessons learned, just so that, we can start making improvements little by little. One of the things what I always highlight is the capacity of those local communities. Yusuf had mentioned before the isolation in the central part of the mountains, Nicole as well. you know, but we have local people on the ground who are willing to take on roles and really work side by side with federal responders, and we just have to find those opportunities to put these two folks together. I mean, I've seen it can work, you know. I know I've seen community build their own you know, disaster plans. I've seen them. They do it in a couple of weeks. They renew their plans when appropriate. You know, we don't have to start from the beginning. There's a series of emergency response plans on the ground, and I think we just have to take the right people to those communities to see what's out there and make sure that the response is contextualized, and let's listen to those leaders tell us how to do it.
I think, Yusuf, go ahead, and then we close the panel with.
Yeah, I think that there's something to be said about the contextualized response, and we've talked about that concept before. That, you know, at least when I was younger, people were already on the ground prepared to deal with disaster response, and it was really from the local people. It was semi-government, but it was the local people were already trained. I think that we need to push for that type of orientation to come back, for just people in their own communities to already be mindful that with climate change, this is going to hopefully it's not the norm, but it's said scientifically to be the norm. And I think that another thing is that we need to create more of a cultural bond between us and the island, because a lot of Puerto Ricans, we have become content with kind of disconnecting. And so we have to become more connected. And I think that we need to take advantage of the fact that this new world of technology has allowed us to keep in communication and to share information. And we need more data based points where this information can be shared freely. We can see what's going on, and we need to anticipate the reality. I mean, one of the things that was said by many people was that the hurricane was underreported. And so people took it very lightly. Other people said that it was reported, but people didn't take it seriously. So I think even getting accurate information to the people with regard to how these hurricanes are going to hit, so that we can anticipate ahead of time too. So to have that, anticipated response, to have people that are trained on the ground, also to have that open flow of communication between us and the island. So we have bonds, and we kind of already know people, because by knowing people, it is very easy to make moves. If it's just organizational, the organizational approach is very important, but without the personal connection, it becomes difficult. We have to have a multi-tiered response, I believe. And I think that it can be done if we continue, those of us who are on this panel, we can continue these conversations and push for this, actually. Push for there to be a multi-tiered response instead of just depending on FEMA or the bigger organizations, or depending on the grassroots. It has to be, a multi-perspective type of thing, in my belief.
Thank you, Yusuf. So we have to wrap up. Some questions remained unanswered of the people that participated in the chat, but this is the beginning. We know, as we heard with our four panelists, many actors came together to mitigate the humanitarian crisis in Puerto Rico, a sustained crisis that still lingers, right? So my hopes is that these will be for organizations, academics, international NGOs. I hope that these panel serves as a way to articulate a call to action, right? And manage to, in the future, to meet again, centralized information, institutionalize our dynamics that started in 2017 to help Puerto Rico. So I will say thank you to everyone. I hope that we can continue connected, and that this panel inspires us to reach a more concrete consensus between organizations and organizations here and also in Puerto Rico, and on the ways to act and organize for the future. So thank you very much. Please stay connected for our next panel on community, moderated by David Galarza. Thank you. Have a great day.
Thank you, Julio. And thank you all of the panelists that join in. So right now, this was our first panel. What we're gonna do, you can see the program here for day one. We have our next panel is the community panel that is scheduled for 12:45, so around 10 minutes. It's going to be moderated by David Galarza. He's an activist from New York City. And we're going to have Marcos Vilar from Florida, Lynn Marie Rivera Martinez from North Carolina, Jaime Inclán from New York, and Xiomara Rodriguez joining from Chicago. So that's a great panel. So we're gonna ask all of you, we're gonna, as I mentioned before, we're gonna cut, let me show here. Yeah, I don't know why Julio is showing there, but it's okay. We're gonna be basically cutting the live on Facebook, and then we're gonna continue here, and we're gonna go live again on the same Facebook page, Boricuas Unidos en la Diáspora, in about 10 minutes with the next panel. So please stay tuned to the Facebook page. We'll go live again in about 10 minutes. Thank you, everyone. And thank you to all of our panelists and Julio, the moderator.